Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Today, I'm gonna walk you through some tricks and tips about the UI testing for your Xamarin.Forms app. I will be your host this afternoon. My name is Codrina Merigo. I work as a software engineer for a healthcare company. I work mainly as a Xamarin developer with Xamarin.Forms, and I'm dealing with everything from the front end to the testing part of the application. Peak of this pyramid, we have the UI test. And in this layer, you will be testing something that it's more from an end user perspective. So it's something that you see regardless of the data that stands behind your application. Also, during the test, usually people do the manual testing. That is, I think it's very important. And the automatic UI test is one to substitute this kind of testing. As I said, we're focusing on an end user perspective. So we are in a level where the tests are very fragile and brittle. That's why it is recommending to focus for this test and only verify the user interface without looking on other functionalities that they have, because usually these kind of functionalities are tested as during the unit testing phase. Now, if you think about your user interface that you created together with your designer, how would you imagine to test it manually? So let's say you want to log in into an application. We have a simple login page like the one in this slide. So in order to log into an application, you need to enter your username and your password, and then hit the log button. So in order to do this manually, the first thing that you'll do is to locate the username field, tap on it, so you do an interaction, and start typing your username. The same you'll do for your password field, and after you entered the information, you locate the login button and you'll click on it. Once you click the login button, you'll need to ensure that you actually log in an application, so you might see something. So while you're testing your user interface manually, you are locating the element that you want, and then you'll start interacting with it. And this is exactly how what you will do in your automating UI test. Oh, just two simple tasks: locate the element and interact with it. Also, while we're speaking about the UI tests, there are some nice principles that it's very keen to have while you're thinking about writing your UI test. The so-called principles. So in order to have a very smooth UI tests, your UI test need to be fast. Also because usually testing the user interface is kind of slow. So as a developer, you'll try not to make them even slower. They, as any test you are writing, they need to be independent and also repeatable. So try not to use something that are constant or token access that you might just burn in your test. They also are self-validated usually by using the assert. And another thing that you want to take care of is the time. So try to not make them very complicated. So if you think that your user interface is very heavy of elements, you might think to split the test in multiple tests in order to accurately test every part of your interface. So, getting started from Visual Studio, we now have a Xamarin UI Test Platform project that is already available for from Visual Studio 2019. And once you create the user UI test project, it already came with some NuGet packages and two classes. One is the app initializer, and the other one will contain the test. The UI test we're going to write can be platform specific. So even if we are writing application, you may have something specific for Android and for iOS. So you can divide your test. Otherwise, you can write the same test for the application. Something you will need for the configuration part is the Android device ID and the iOS device ID. So in order to run your test an Android device, like a physical device, you just need to connect your device to your Windows machine. For the iOS, you can only do it by connecting your iPhone to a Mac machine. And in order to find the ID for Mac, you have these options: run instruments.test devices, and for Android, you can launch the ADB devices. Another thing you will need to test is the APK path that can be local, or you can also give an already installed application that you have on your phone. So imagine you have a task only to write some UI test and someone give you the application. You can also do that. So let's see this in action. So I am on Visual Studio. I have here a very basic Xamarin.Forms application created from predefined template that is using shell, but you can add your UI test project to every solution that we have. So you click on your solution, and then you add a new project. The project window will pop up, and you'll look for UI test. And here you have your project, Xamarin UI Test Cross-Platform Test Project. Name it as you wish, and you create it. The project will be added to your applications. As I was saying, you also have here references, and in order to make your UI test, you will need the 3 NuGet packages to add to your project that I already added here. As you can see, you will have the unit, which is the framework that helps you run the UI test, the test adapter, also Xamarin UI test NuGet packages. The other two classes that are the app initializer. So in order to make your test running, you will have to give the APK file that I already added here. So this is a local path where I have my APK installed. And the same you can do for our iOS path. And this is how you add your project to an existing solution. Now let's get back to the presentation. We'll see a nice way to start and interact with your application. In order to write the test, there is this console-like environment tool that is called REPL, that stands for read, eval, print, and loop. This application connects with your application on the phone in order to have a real-time interaction with the application. Some very useful commands that you can have with this application are the tree. So as the name says, once you hit the tree, you'll see the tree of your page, and we'll see that in a moment. With your application, the main thing we will do is to query. So our test will be basically just querying the user interface. And another thing that is very handy, it's the flash. So once you're querying your application, if you want to see something, you will invoke the flash method, and the element that you are querying will flash on the screen. This is very helpful and allows you to explore the user interface and create queries, as I said, in order to interact with your application. And now we'll see how to use this inside your UI project. So in order to invoke this tool that comes with Visual Studio, you need to create a test for this. Now we moved into the test page. You already find this part pre-filled. So everything that we have, it's your application. You also have the platform. As I was saying, you can decide if you want to write your test for Android, as I was showing during this presentation. If you want to have the same with the iOS, I just commented this because I'm using a Windows machine. Another thing that comes when you start the project is the setup page. So before each test, the app will start on the platform that you selected. And as I was saying, your application is what you are interacting with. And the very nice thing that we have here is that intelligence is working for us. In order to open the REPL, we just create a test for this. I open REPL and I invoke app.REPL in order to open the tool. If you want to see your test, we'll go here on Visual Studio on the test tab. We open the Text Explorer pane, and you'll see that here, after the discovering phase, so after you build your project, UI test project has one element. If I expand this, I'll have for the Android part, because as I was saying, I commented the iOS, but if I decomment that, you'll see them both. I have here a test that is called OpenREPL. By clicking right on it and run it, the test will start. I'll have my platform initialization and my application will start. So for this presentation, I am using Visor in order to mirror my actual phone. So what the test will do, it will connect to my phone, open up the application with this first screen, as you can see here, and then the REPL framework tool will happen for us in this console-like window. And every time I interact from here, it will be linked with the same view that I see on my phone. So for example, if I write 3 and click enter, after some time, you will see the root view of my application as I design it here. So I have the logo, the username box, the password label, password box, and the login button. You can see it here together with some Android default placeholder that you will find while you're developing your application. And if I will ask application to flash, as you can see also here in this tool, you have the IntelliSense that help you write the commands. So if I say, for example, flash everything, you will see that all my pages start flashing. And this is very useful if you want to flash on a specific element. Okay, now I want to show you also something more about what should we unit test for. So speaking about the user interface, as I was saying, we'll mainly do queries on the interface in order to verify the views and the controls on the screen. So I am mainly a developer, and the majority of the time I create the screen, so I know everything with what is on the screen, and then I UI test it. But this happen also for some QI testers that have the application tested and then they try to recreate the test out in an automatic way. Another thing that we check is for the navigations. So for example, in your application, while you are from a page to another, you need to ensure that you actually showing the second page to your user. And another thing that UI test is handy for is when you want to interact with some live elements, so like buttons that open other information, checkboxes that might handle some visibility, if you have some tabs, if you're using the shell navigation, you want to ensure that all the part of your application are working properly. So in order to write some tests, usually the so-called AAA pattern is used, so the arrange, act, answer pattern. I have a very easy example here. So this pattern is formed of 3 parts. The first part is arranging application. So if, as in this example, you want to test if the sum is okay, you create two variables. For example, S5, B7. You act, you called your method that you want to test, and then you assert that the result of your method is the same that you are expecting. And we will do basically a very similar approach in our UI test. In the last years, we also you also may have run into some BDD approach for your development. So another way to write your tests might be following this approach, the so-called given when then approach. They are usually written in this non-technical language, something like getting. So it's very useful if you impersonate into your user. So for example, as a registered user, I want to be able to log in so I can see the application. You have the scenarios, and you will do the same inside your test by following these steps that maybe someone provided this to you already. So we talk about why we are trying to do the UI test. And I think the other question might be how we interact with the element in order to identify them on the screen. There is something that is very helpful for us, and it's called the automation ID that helps identify every control on the screen by assigning them this unique identifier called automation ID, and can be assigned to basic all of your controls. It's different from the Xname you may have using, so it's not enough to have the Xname. You also need to add the automation ID for your control in order to identify it on the screen. And another thing that you need to keep in mind is that when you're writing this test, it's important to write every single action, because sometimes take some actions that are performed by the operating system for granting. For example, the keyboard is missing, or the keyboard pop-up that sometimes may not be triggered during your UI test. So you also need to ensure that you handle this kind of interactions. And now we'll go to Visual Studio. As I was saying, I have this basic application. Created a XAML view that contains the logo, the username label entry, the password and the password entry, and the login button. So inside my share project, I have my view, which is the login page view. So apart from some graphic stuff, I have here a grid containing everything. And inside the grid, I have the label and the entry text. So for every entry text, I assign an automation ID. In this case, I have the username box for the username. Then moving forward, I have my password box. And at the end of the page, I have my login button. So let's move back to the test. I will call again the REPL framework that I closed. So I will run this test. The REPL tool will pop up on the screen, and we will interact with the elements that I assigned an automation ID to. So the application have been closed, reopened from the test. Here I have the framework. So as I was mentioning before, in order to see something on the screen, sometimes .flash command. So I will write up .flash. And I will pass to this command one of my automation ID. So for example, I will pass username box. Then I hit enter. I hope that you can see here that the query has been performed. An element has been found. You can also see some other information, like if it has a text inside, if it has a class, you sometimes can assign class yourself, if it's enabled. You also have some information like some positioning. And for a second, just after I I invoke it, the entry will flash on our screen. So in order to find your elements on the screen, you need to add the automation ID to your elements. I think it's very simple to find the element. The UI automation, it's very important that you will understand that it's supposed to run very slow. And also it's trying to emulate an actual user. So every time you something, it's something that a person would ideally perform on your application. So in some cases, you might use like a mock server in order to mock interactions. And it's also important, you will want to wait for an element to be on screen before you will check for that. Sometimes it may seem very fast for you because it's automation, but the query will work after that. So waiting for elements can be something very handy in your UI test. So we identify our element in the screen, and the next step will be to interact with them. We will have a lot of queries. For example, if we want to find a label or some custom element, we'll have the app.query command, and you'll find an element that it's marked with your automation ID. So it's very important that before you start your UI test to assign automation ID to every control you want to test. Also, you can have a lot of gesture that you want to emulate in your test. And also, as I will be showing to you very shortly, if you want to interact, for example, with an entry, it will be important to dismiss the keyboard if sometimes the operating system won't do that for you. And now I think it's time for us to write our first UI tag. And let's move to Visual Studio. So in order to write a test, we'll have the test decoration, very simple. The test it's public void. From some Q&A, QA principle, it will be handy for you to write your test something like should be able to or could be able to see something, because with your test you're not giving for granted. So for example, my test, I will call it should be able to log in. So login. In this test, I personally prefer to use the arrange, act, assert approach. So I start with arranging my test. So I will move back to my emulated phone here just to show you what I will be doing. So I will say something like, I want to test this user interface. Here I have a username entry. So I will tap here. I will enter my username. Then I will dismiss the keyboard. I will tap the password box. I will enter the password. I will dismiss the keyboard. Then I will click login. This is a sample application, so it works without the automation. And once I will click login, I want to ensure that I am actually logged in. For example, I will check if I have the welcome box on this page. Also, for the welcome box, I already assigned an automation ID. So as I was saying, everything that you need to have is interact with your app. The intelligence help while you're writing the test. So the first thing that I will do, I will tap on the username box. After that, I will enter text. Here, pass string, for example, the username. As I was saying, I will dismiss the keyboards. You can see the intelligence is working very well for this part. I will do the same for the passwords. I'll just copy this one down here. So I also entered my password. I will dismiss the keyboard. So this part, I finished arranging and preparing my interface. After that, I'll do the action. So I will tap, I will act, and I will say app.tap. I will tap on my login button. After tapping on the login button, I will wait for the next page and for the welcome box that I want to ensure that's present on the page. So I will say app.wait for an element. You can also wait for a no element, depends on your scenario. So I will wait for my welcome box. And if everything goes as I am expecting, is the assert part here. So let's say I will have a Boolean that will take my query. So I'll do app.query, for example. So I will query the new interface and I will look for an element that it's marked, so that has the automation ID as before, called welcome box. So if there is any, the will be true. So the very last part of this test will be assert is true that my result is true. Okay, I will save this. I'll go back to my text explorer. So as you can see, my test has already been found here because it has the test decoration. I'll go there here and try to run my test. Here is phone, so the test, let me pin this here, okay, will look for the application. We'll load it on. As you can see, if it's already running, it will close it. It will open it again. And if I have no misspell something, it will tap on username, enter use, tap on password, then tap on the login, and it it do the query, and also, as you can see, the test is green, and in the side you can see other information like the duration or something like that. For example, if I am writing something that is not true, so for example, if I say this is password box, so I write an element that is not present on the interface and try to run the test again, it will do the same, will close the application, try to run it, and will give you an error that would say that the element hasn't been found. So it's important that you have your automation in the correct. You may have seen has been popped out. Then he will look for the password that is wrong this time. After some times, it will time out and will pop you with the error in this box here. So I think that I will let it run. Might take some time. And I will show you some more queries example that you might found while you're writing your test. So some of you might have used some Syncfusion elements. The Syncfusion elements you will also see inside the REPL tool. Some elements are a little more complicated than a checkbox. So for example, you have a switch that it's a custom element. So in order to interact with it, you might want to give the exact position of this element. So the REPL tool comes handy in this time because it gives you the exact position of every element. So inside their test, you can say tap on some specific coordinates and you will have them on every device that you are testing. Other scenarios, you may use a web view inside your Xamarin.Forms application. And if you are used to write some websites, you can interact by choosing the elements by their class or by ID. It depends on how the web view is structured, but don't worry, from your Xamarin.Forms application, you can also test all these kind of elements. Something to keep in mind that I already mentioned is that it's important to wait for the elements. So the UI test provides you with these two APA. You can also give some time span. So let's say, for example, you have something that it's supposed to run slow. So you say, I want to, let's say, wait for 30 seconds and then check my interface. Another thing that you may want to emulate is the scrolling. So imagine you have a very long user interface. So something is very down in the page. Every time you're trying to test, you'll see the exact height of your device. So if something is at the bottom, you'll need to scroll down to an element or scroll up if you already are down and so on. You can also give a scroll strategy and define how you will scroll this. In order to emulate an actual user, you might want also to invoke some gesture. Pretty much all the gestures are supported in UI test. Something like the double tap or swipe or touch and hold, depends everything on your application. Another thing that you can use are the screenshot. So maybe for some quality reason, or if you have an error in your test and something is not on the screen, you can invoke the app.screenshot and take a screenshot in that specific time. And after you have run all your tests, you will see that something was missing by just looking at the screenshot. I think that it's very important or can be handy for you to write first the test in a natural language, or if you have the BDD files, you just want to read them and make your mind around your tests. And then try to do them manually. And after that, you can, with maybe the use of the REPL, try to write them. So imagine you have wrote your test with this very simple operation. So you interacted with all your element, created some tests, and you want to run them maybe in the App Center Test Cloud portal. So in the App Center Test portal, you can create your device set. Maybe you have some ideas of some devices that you want to test of. For example, I created some 4 Android devices. Inside the App Center, you will select the test framework, Xamarin UI test. You will upload your UI test package. App Center, all the extraction, will validate your test, will invoke the devices for you, we run the test on each device, and after that, we'll generate a report for you. Something very nice from Apps is that they're using actual device to run your tests. You'll have some very nice report. A report is something like this. You will see how many tests have been passed, if the devices are okay. If you have some errors, you will see why the tests haven't passed. And also inside the App Center, you'll have a dedicated area for your screenshot if you some from your application. Some of you may also have used Azure DevOps. So if you have a Azure DevOps pipeline, you can also add UI test here by adding a new task to your pipeline. You will just need to fill in some information that you can get from App Center, like the app name, device set, your APK file, some other information. And you can run it also from here, and you'll also have some nice report for that. Otherwise, if you want to run your test locally, as I already mentioned, on my physical device connected to my Windows machine. If you want, you can also run them on an emulator. So once you have your UI test, the Visual Studio will see if you have maybe a simulator opened or some physical device that is connected. So the test will run directly on the device. Otherwise, you can specify a device ID directly in the app initializer here. In the meantime, the test was the wrong test that I wrote hasn't passed. So here you'll have the error that will say something like, I had an error while performing up on the password box. and it says something like the query gave no result. So in this case, we'll advise you to review your test. Okay, so I think that is pretty much that you can do with the UI test. I think you can also became very creative while writing your test. It depends everything on your interface, on your interactions, how many pages you have on your application. And I can give you some advices from my experience. One important thing if you are using UI test for Android is to disable the shared mono runtime, because otherwise your test won't run on Android. If you're using a Mac and you want to debug something on your iOS project, you'll need to add the enable test cloud string for the compiler in order to help them identify you have some tests in your application. Also on the machine, it may happen that the simulator doesn't pop on the screen if you are using the simulator. So maybe useful to delete this folder, the XZB folder, and try again. This happened to me a lot of times. I think it was handy to put it here. Another thing that I have experienced is try to write no more than 20 UI tests per project if you want to run them locally. As I was mentioning, UI tests are kind of slow, so after some time something can go timeout and your tests won't be running anymore. If you have only a Mac machine, you can also test your Android version on that. Just remember to open the simulator on your Mac before running the test, because from Visual Studio for Mac, it can open your iOS simulator, but it can't open your Android. So just remember to create it on your Mac machine and just open it before you're running the test. And I think my last piece of advice for you is to not forget your UI tests and try to keep them live as the application are changing a lot. Also the user interface are getting kind of complex. Try to keep them live and make them all green. And I think that was all from my side. I want to thank you. You will find the code on my GitHub, and also you'll find this presentation on the Syncfusion YouTube channel and on the blog.